This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Hal Ackerman, is co-chair emeritus of the highly regarded UCLA Screenwriting Program. His book, Write Screenplays That Sell: The Ackerman Way, is now in its third printing and is becoming the text of choice in a growing number of screenwriting programs around the country. He's sold material to all of the broadcast networks and major studios. His play, Testosterone, How Prostate Cancer Made a Man of Me, was the recipient of the William Saroyan Centennial Prize for Drama. Under its new title, Prick, it won Best Script at the 2011 United Solo Festival. Hal has had numerous short stories published in literary journals, among them North Dakota Review, New Millennium Writing, The Pinch, Southeast Review, and Passages, and most recently in the 2016 Idaho Review and Fiction International. Sweet Day was read by Academy Award nominee Robert Forster and is available at the Harper Collins Publishers Digital Media Cafe. The Dancer Horse was nominated for a Pushcart Prize and is available on Audible, read by Adrian Pasdar. Roof Garden won the Warren Adler 2008 Award for Fiction and is published by Kindle. Alfalfa was included in the anthology I Wanna Be Sedated, 30 Writers on Parenting Teenagers. Belle and Melinda was selected by Robert Olen Butler as the winner of the World's Best Short Story Contest. It appeared in the spring 2013 edition of the Southeast Review. Hal was also a winner in the Lorian Hemingway Contest in 2014 and had fiction in fall of 2015 in the Idaho Review and in Fiction International. Hal's published two outstanding and successful novels in a detective series about an aging counterculture PI. Stein Stoned won the Lovey Award for Best First Novel in 2010 and was followed in 2011 by Stein Stung. And I can tell you I've read both books, and they are great fun. I recommend them to you highly. Hal's short story collection, The Boy Who Had a Peach Tree Growing Out of His Head and Other Natural Phenomena, which I've also read, has just been published by Hadassah Word Press. StoryBeat listeners, if you want to check out how to write a killer short story, read this excellent anthology. And I am deeply proud of the fact that I'm among the special lucky stiffs who got to be one of Hal's students while I was in attendance at UCLA's incredible screenwriting program. So I'm beyond happy to welcome the legendary Hal Ackerman as my guest on StoryBeat. Hal, I'm so very glad you could join me today.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
well earned and well deserved, and you've done everything, so that's why you're going to be a great guest today, where we're going to learn a whole lot of things. I'm wondering what got you into the business of writing in the first place. What were your earliest inspirations and influences?
Well, I guess it was to try to annoy as many people as possible. When I was in junior high school, I guess it was, I started to write song parodies, and myself and three other miscreants would just sort of go around to various classrooms and interrupt them and just do impromptu performances, much to the dismay of the teachers and to the delight of the students. And I guess sort of that that spirit had spurred me on. I never necessarily thought of it as a career choice. My real career choice was to become a Major League Baseball player.
How'd that work out?
Check my baseball card. I grew up in Brooklyn, and my goal was to become the catcher that would follow in the footsteps of Roy Campanella. But then two things happened. I discovered that I could not catch a pop-up, a foul pop-up over my head. and could not hit a major league curveball, so I had to find other career choices. But the real influence that actually, I can recall the moment. I went to see the last preview before opening night of the musical Camelot.
Oh, yeah.
On Broadway with Richard Burton
Wow.
and Julie Andrews.
Sure.
And it was absolutely stunning to me. As I said, I had continued to write song parodies and, various sort of little just humorous essays. But when I heard that and, these incredibly clever lyrics by Alan J. Lerner, I just said to myself, I want to do that. And the very next day, I went to the library. I was in college at the time, at Queens College in New York. I went to the library and got a book out on Robin Hood and started going through it, thinking how I could adapt that to a musical.
Wow.
in the ilk of Camelot. And I wrote an original song lyric, which I'd never done before, and gave it to a friend of mine who liked to play the piano and loved opera. And I said, see if you could put a melody to this. And he did, and it sounded very much like a song that grown-ups might have written. And then we actually wrote a full-length original musical based on Robin Hood, and it was actually performed 3 performances in the big theater at Queens College. There had never before been a complete student-written, produced musical there in the theater.
Oh, wow.
It had 500 seats. They were filled for the 3 performances. People laughed at things that in my head I thought were funny. It was the most exhilarating experience.
Oh, yeah.
Feeling that, as a theater buff, and a musical theater professional yourself, you certainly know what that feels like when a musical is working, that sense of electricity that generates in the audience.
Definitely.
I was, at the end of it, was author, and I, came up on stage and felt this wave of love and appreciation coming at me. And to this day, I remember the thought that went through my mind, which was, I'll probably never have any real love in my life, but I'll take this as a substitute anytime. So that was the beginning.
The rest is history. Well, at what age were you? Was that 18, 19, somewhere in there?
I guess that I was 21. I guess it was when it was done.
And then the hooks got in, and that was it.
That was it. And I had to make a choice of did I really have the courage, the temerity to think that I could possibly do this as a life? And I remember sitting in my room. I lived on Long Island at the time, and saying to myself, making a deal with myself that I had to be able to say that success, which obviously was something that I wanted, but that could not be the defining choice. I had to accept that it could go, my fondest dreams could come true, or it could all fall apart, but I would still do it. If I could accept both of those possibilities, then I can go ahead and try.
Are you saying you would do this work of being a writer regardless of whether you were successful or paid? Is that what you were saying to yourself?
I was saying that I had to recognize that either could happen, and that I had to go into it recognizing that both outcomes could be possible, but that the choice of just doing it was the most important thing. Sure.
Well, that's fabulous advice. And most writers starting out, they all reach for some kind of star, and frequently it's just doing the work. It is doing the work.
The moment was validated a second time. During one summer, I had 2 jobs. I guess I was like 21 or something like that, and I worked as a bellhop in a hotel, the Collingwood Hotel, which no longer exists, on 35th Street in New York. Mm-hmm. And I worked around the corner at a restaurant called the Burger Ranch. And I had strange hours at the hotel, but my Sunday and Monday shifts were together. So I worked from 4 to midnight, and then from midnight to 8. So I worked 16 hours straight. And then at 8 in the morning on Monday, went directly to my job at the restaurant. So one day a week I worked 24 consecutive hours.
Wow.
But I went around the corner, and it was a Monday morning, and it was at 34th Street and 6th Avenue, like in front of Macy's and Gimbel's, one of the absolute busiest corners in New York City. And it was 8 in the morning, and thousands and thousands of people were coming up out of the subway, on their way to work. And I had a moment that I just was busy enough, having just worked 16 hours at this hotel, and I was just watching their faces as they came up. And it was kind of like being on acid in a certain strange way, though I'd never yet been on acid. I was looking at their faces, and they were already like disgruntled, angry, resigned, and deadened. And it was just Monday morning. It was just the beginning of the work week. And this thought went through my head. I said, I never want to have that look on my face. I want to get away with doing what makes me happy as long as I possibly can. It was like my Gone with the Wind moment. God is my witness, I'll never go hungry again. It was, I said to myself, I will never make my life be ruled by doing something that I hate.
Well, clearly,
and writing was something that I loved.
Clearly, you had what I guess we would think of as a plot point moment in your life that was a turning point.
That's true.
Where you had that moment that was said, okay, almost like your inciting incident right there in your life.
Yep, absolutely right.
So you've worked with tons of writers, thousands of writers, and creating stories in many different genres. Obviously, drama, comedy, reality, sci-fi, detective, and all those kinds of different genres. Is there one genre that you prefer to work in over another?
Most of the things that I have done have been sort of pillaging my own life in a certain kind of way. So, I guess. When I came to Los Angeles, well, I began as a playwright, and as a playwright, especially it was in the '60s, and it was the off Broadway was absolutely burgeoning, and so there was a lot of experimental theater going on. But really, the whole idea was expressing yourself, trying to find truth in what you were writing. And when I came to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, that was still a viable thing to be doing in movies. I mean, that's changed quite a lot. But movies still had, at that time, the 70s were a real golden age, in Hollywood. And it was really a time where you could still explore the human condition in movies. And now it's become really a total escape from the human condition. But
yes,
for me,
that's true.
But for me, it's really that. And it could be in any genre. I mean, there have been great science fiction films, that are not just about monsters and special effects, but are about the human condition. Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes immediately to mind.
Sure.
And many others. And mysteries too. So in any genre, when it is really trying to explore something that is really true, and when I work with students, I sometimes, I look for that in their stories, and sometimes I meet resistance because that was not, maybe not the way they really thought about it, but that's what I gravitate toward. Finding emotional truth.
Resistance in students? I know nothing of that. Yeah, well, I think that's not just students. I think that's writers in general. If you come at a writer who's got a story idea and you try to knock them off their perch, they will fight you for it. So
yes, and they should. Anybody. The beauty of being a freelance writer. The downside, of course, is you're not getting paid for it. But the beauty of it is you get to write it once exactly the way you envision it.
Of course.
I don't think that it is. I don't think that that me or any other teacher should try to impose our own will on somebody else. I mean, you can offer choices and offer possibilities that they may not necessarily have thought of, and then if they choose to go with them, you help. And if they choose not to, you also help.
I think that's one of the hallmarks of the program at UCLA for the time I was there, certainly, and now I practice teaching students in the same manner, which is to say nobody in my time at UCLA ever said, no, you must write this or that. You can't write that. You're allowed to write what you feel like you need to write. And then someone was there to sort of direct you or guide you as to whether or not you were going down roads that were not useful. And that is the right way, I think.
I agree. And who's to know what's useful, really? Everyone just has their opinion, and I think I know that you are an excellent teacher. There's no doubt in my mind, from having known you. But I think that, first of all, one of the great things about UCLA is that students people are free to make what might be called mistakes. Because that's how we learn,
Absolutely.
I have a child. I don't know whether you have children yet.
Nope.
But one of the beautiful things and poignant things is that as much as a parent or as a teacher, that you try to invest people with the tools of not making mistakes. If you look at your own life, and certainly if I look at mine, the most important discoveries I made were things I made on my own as a result of having made mistakes. And you have to give students and children the courage to be able to do that and to recover from that and to learn from that.
I like to say that George Bernard Shaw, that hack, George Bernard Shaw once said that a man who makes no mistakes makes nothing at all. So you've got to make your own mistakes. Nobody can give it to you. You have to make your own mistakes.
Yep. There's a writer, Wendell Berry. There's a recent documentary about him, but there's a quote from him that I find very helpful, both as a teacher and as a parent, and it is this. He says, "Put it in their reach, not in their hands."
Very good.
I just love that.
Oh, that's great. Put it in their reach, not in their hands. I got to remember that.
It's a good one.
So in the last few years, you've been writing tons of prose. You've written 2 Stein novels. You've written a lot of short stories, and obviously you've also had your hand in the world of teaching screenwriting and so on. Let's talk about the different challenges between writing for the screen versus writing prose. What are the big differences?
It's a really interesting and profound question. I think that I've been a playwright, and where playwriting was the thing that I was doing,
right.
And and many years as a screenwriter and and as a fiction writer. And what's interesting is that I found out, whatever the genre, whatever the form is that I happen to be writing in, when ideas come, they come as, like when I was a playwright, any idea would come, oh, this would be a good idea for a play. And, and if I was writing story, oh, this might be a good idea for a story. So, but I think that especially now, because the industries in both publishing and movies are changing and have changed really profoundly over the last decade.
Sure.
I think that the idea of the marketplace, so, the place where whatever it is that you are writing is going to be presented, has an influence. There are certain ideas that that seem like maybe a really interesting idea, but would this be a movie idea? Well, an idea for a short story. In a short story, something very slight can change. The temperature of a lake can change by 1.5 degrees, and that might be the moment of drama in the story, the way it changes the psychological, blah, blah,
sure,
blah, blah,
blah.
Sure. But if you're taking that same idea for a movie, there would have to be a tidal wave that would destroy the village. As I said, especially these days, when and of course now with television, and television is the savior, I think, these days of people writing for the screen.
No question.
When I first came to Los Angeles, there was a real hierarchy and lowerarchy of the kind of writers, and movie writers were way up on top, and TV writers were considered to be hacks.
Sure.
And people who were branded as television writers could not crack into writing movies because they were thought of in that way.
Same with actors and directors.
That's right.
They'd get
And
pigeonholed.
now, of course, it's changed completely. Now everybody wants to write the television.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the ways in which television has so profoundly influenced movies and the movie industry is that movies now are no longer thought of as standalone. You come in and pitch a movie idea, and they want to hear that. Whereas even 5, 6, 7 years ago, a movie would be thought of as a standalone. Now it is the beginning of a franchise. And in the same way that when you try to pitch a television story, they want to hear what's going to happen in season 5. Right now when you pitch a movie story, they want to see, how that is going to become a franchise. So I think it's the market really has driven very strongly the way in which one thinks about an idea for and what might be a successful thing to attack as a movie. As far as in short stories, I think they are still, styles and everything change, and the way there is a modern way of writing fiction that is different from the Updike model. But still, I think it is still much more personal, much more in the sense literary. I think there's a growingly strong disparity between the readership of fiction and the attendantship of films. And I think you have to, in a certain kind of way, envision to whom you are writing, and what the purpose of your writing is. If you write and sell a pilot, and you become part of the team that is the permanent version of it, you're going to be pretty well set financially.
Definitely.
For a short story writer, I've said this at a couple of short story writing conferences when people bemoan how difficult it is for a freelance fiction writer to make a living. I tell people I have done an exhaustive study on the fiction market, and all you have to do to become, to be able to sustain yourself is to be able to write and sell 10 short stories every day.
Nothing to it.
Nothing to it, baby.
How about one a day? So you, when the books that I've read of yours, the two Stein books, and I've read your short stories in The Boy Who Had a Peach Tree Growing Out of His Head, and one of the things that's what I think of the hallmark of Hal Ackerman work is that there's a ring of veracity to what you write. It feels real. It doesn't feel like you're just throwing it out there and making it up. How much research do you do?
Well, the first one was about stolen marijuana, and I enjoyed the research in that for many years before I began. And the Stein character, is a divorced single parent who had been kind of a rebel in the 60s and was raising a rebellious teenage daughter. The great difference between his life and mine is that his car is gray and mine was blue.
So this was your doppelganger. Stein is your doppelganger.
I would say so. Yes, I would say, certainly his character.
Not the detective stuff, though. You've never been a detective, have you?
I've never been a detective. That is definitely true, and I think that probably showed in some of the plot holes.
The plot holes that were there, Hal, were very delightful, whatever they were.
Well, thank you. When I first started to write the first Stein book, there was just like a line just kept running through my head. I had no idea where it was coming from or what it was, but it sounded like it was a very provocative line, and the line was, "The phone rang too early for it to be good news," and I just loved that as an opening line. I had no idea who was calling, who the call was from, and so I just wrote it down because if you're, and then, as so often happens, as I know that you know, and as a writer, you write something down, and then, without your having known it, there's something that follows that,
Absolutely.
And there's another line, and so that sort of kept happening, and that was really how that book began. I had no notion of a plot. The first 100 pages I wrote of it were just this guy driving around Los Angeles, having an internal monologue of everything he hated about L.A. And and then at the end of each chapter there might be like one or two sentences that lean toward the possibility of a plot. And I realized this is ridiculous. That if I really wanted this to be a detective story, there actually had to be a story. And so I started interviewing some detectives and found the second story that was braided through it about this counterfeit shampoo, which I thought was mildly interesting. But people who write these things for a living, really write them all the time. They turn them out, one a year, one every 8 or 9 months.
Sure.
It took me about 6 years to write this first one, which I would never tell anybody.
6 years.
I know. And it's because I kept, I would write some of it, and then I got like a writing, a job, and it took me away from it for a year. And I'm not decrying the fact of having to make a living as a screenwriter occasionally, but it delayed the book. But finally, I had a draft of it, and I showed it to this writing group that I was in part of, and they read it, and they loved the stuff that I'm pretty good at, which is dialogue and character. But they all were very puzzled because at a certain point, the person it really seemed like was the killer, all of a sudden it was just somebody else. And I said, so I did the thing that I tell all my students never to do, which is I read the thing. Because if you read it, you lose the whole illusion of how good it is that you maintain without having read it. And I realized as I read through it that I myself had forgotten who the killer was.
You actually forgot who the killer was?
I had forgotten, yeah.
Wow.
In all of the sort of breaks of between writing it, I just had forgotten.
Well, when I was in the professional program and you were teaching that, because that was prior to taking the graduate school, you recommended in class that we all read a book called Bird by Annie Lamott.
Yes.
And she's got that marvelous chapter in there called Shitty First Drafts. And
yes.
And that's what you're talking about. Is like, what are we doing here?
Yes. I still love that book and think that it should be a must for every person, not just writers, certainly not just screenwriters, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
It is. It truly is a wonderful book. She's a great writer herself, and the wisdom in it is invaluable. You mentioned a moment ago writing groups. How important are writing groups to you?
Oh, I was in one in Los Angeles for about 25 years, maybe, and it was mostly a prose and poetry group, but it was so inspiring. The people that were in it were absolutely wonderful, and I know that there were some screenwriting groups that evolved out of classes, 434 classes at UCLA,
right? And
they stayed intact and met with some regularity for decades, and I think it is gigantically important for so many reasons, not the least of which is it makes you have to deliver goods. If you are meeting every month and you're turning in pages, it imposes deadlines upon you. And one of the great things about school, about UCLA, or especially, is the imposition of deadlines.
Definitely.
You had to write in 10 weeks. You had to write a first draft. My God. And once and whether it's good or bad, you had to turn in those pages. And once you get out of school, if that discipline stays with you, it's quite wonderful. But sometimes without that sort of peer pressure around you, or somebody standing over your head, saying where a grade is, or whatever it is, whatever the stick and carrot is, and it's easily lost because lethargy sets in. It's much easier to do something else than to work hard.
It's hard work. It's hard.
Yes, it is. It is. So the idea of a writing group just as an imposition of deadlines is important. Then the secondary thing, which is of equal importance, is hearing your stuff out loud, is getting responsible, generous, and honest feedback from other people that you respect. It's of gigantic value. One of the things that I think happens sometimes to very successful writers, much to their detriment, I think, is that they get enough power to be able to write, produce, and direct something, and there's nobody that that can say no to them. And I think that sometimes that is, it's great for the ego, but sometimes it is not the best thing for the work. I think you need respected outside voices to be able to say, hey, wait a second, you forgot who the killer was.
It's the rare Woody Allens of the world that can write, direct, produce, and then also star in them.
It is rare. Yes, it is. And yes.
And have them be any good. that for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So you also mentioned a moment ago in the writing groups that there were critiques about dialogue and character. So let's talk about those two things for a moment. What would you recommend as the best ways to build characters? How do you avoid stereotypes? How do you build a character?
That question and the answer to it really is I think, the key to everything. I am not the first person, nor will I be the last, and I'm very glad to be in the company of really respected writers like David Mamet and Aaron Sorkin, who, when I see interviews or read interviews that they give, their mantra is the same as mine, though I'm sure we each came to it independently. And neither of the three of us will have been the first or the last person to have discovered this to be true.
Mm-hmm.
But in my book, the second part of it is about the small picture, which is about writing scenes. And for me, the key to character, which is the key of scenes, which is the key to any moment, is the exact same for a writer as it is for an actor, which is, what does the character want in the moment?
Mm-hmm.
What is most important to that character? When I give my sort of lectures, at the very beginning, the very first thing I do is I put a big circle and I write the word theme inside that circle, and then put a big line through it, like a no left turn sign. And I tell writers, I don't want you to think about theme. Doesn't mean I don't want the story to have one. I just don't want you to know about it until you finish writing the story. Then I erase the word theme and insert in it the word desire. And for me, the beginning of any story is, what does a character most profoundly want in the moment? What is the most important thing to the character? And if the writer maintains that one single thought about what the character wants and what he or she will do in order to achieve it, both as a long-range arc and as the force of every moment in the story, character cannot help but reveal its own.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we do to get what we want is who we are. I think that's true in life, and it's true certainly in fiction. When we are confronted by something we most want and something that we have to do to get it, which has consequences, and what we choose to do in any given moment in order to achieve what we want, what we will do, what we won't do, that is what character is, I believe.
You will never guess who has taken that lesson and uses it in all of his classes.
Well, I hope it's everyone. I'm going to guess it might be you.
It might be me. I use that every single class. I talk about theme versus desire and all the rest of it. And I sometimes get really funny looks, and I just keep plowing ahead. But I know that what your lesson is absolutely fundamentally true and is the way to approach things. Though, again, people disagree. They say, no, you got to come up with a theme first. But that's really, you box yourself into various corners and you get stuck.
Yep.
And otherwise you just write a story about those characters. All right, so let's turn to dialogue for a moment. What makes dialogue great? What makes movie dialogue great? What makes prose dialogue great? How does that work?
Well, I think that dialogue, for me, I would say that if I were to evaluate my own modest box of skills, I would say that dialogue is high among the things that I do best. I think it's just like, it's hard to say, really. I think you have to have an ear. I think those two things on both sides of your head are very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like almost the equivalent of a composer having a gift for melody. It's just being able to hear rhythms, hear the way people speak. I would say that bad dialogue is saying in words exactly what it is. It's almost writing thematically for a character. A character who wants something, where the dialogue expresses exactly in words exactly what it is that that the character says that he or she wants. But that doesn't. That I don't think is good dialogue. I mean, I think that's accurate diagnostics. In the same way that writing a story from theme might be accurate diagnostics. But if you were to say, the sins of a father are visited on the son, would that tell you anything about what the characters in The Godfather were about? It wouldn't tell you a thing.
No.
It's something like after the fact. And the same thing about dialogue. It's being able to talk around something. It's being able to, because I mean, in life it is rare that somebody even is able to or would choose to say exactly what it is they're thinking or feeling, depending upon who you're talking to, and depending upon what the circumstance and situation is, depending upon so many things. I think it's the ability in writing dialogue is to place yourself, like almost to be like an emotional ventriloquist, to put yourself in the moment, in a character's mind, heart, life, and what they blurt out, what it is that words say without saying on the nose.
How important that's subtext, yeah. So
it is.
So how does one achieve? I mean, do you have a methodology for achieving subtextual dialogue writing?
I think it just comes. I think it comes from. I think that is something. I understand the question, and I think that part of it just comes from having an ear for it. An artist can see things and find a truth in a hidden image about something that says more than what it is. And I think that people for whom, if I see the world through my ears, I think I can hear, in a line of dialogue or in a line of overheard conversation. To me, the character reveals himself or herself in a way that character may not necessarily be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of hear a life story through something that somebody might say that just reveals more than what that dialogue is. And I know this is just sounding a lot of I don't know what it's sounding like. It's not sounding like good dialogue.
Well,
I know that.
I've asked you a very challenging question. I'm well aware of it. That there may not be a decent answer at all for this, because it's something, again, that you say it, I think, correctly, that you have to have an ear for it. I think that certainly people that write a lot over time develop whatever ear they have to the point where they are writing that way, though I think probably if you polled most successful writers, going back to first drafts again, they write first drafts that are tinny and on the nose, and then later on they go back in and figure out a way to make the dialogue flow in a natural way that is subtextual. But when you get a line of dialogue like "We'll always have Paris" or "We're going to need a bigger boat," those are miracle lines. Where does that come from? And so that's hard to get to.
Well, one of the I'll tell you that there's a couple of exercises that I give to students, and one of which I call the eavesdropper exercise. And back in the turn of the other century, when all the immigrants are coming here at the beginning of the 1900s, they all believed that the streets were paved with gold. And what I think is true is that for a writer, the streets are still paved with gold, and that gold is overheard dialogue. And I encourage all the time writers to always have some writing or recording device with them, and to not just when they happen to be someplace and overhear something, but really as a discipline to put themselves deliberately in places where they would be afraid to go, where they would be uncomfortable to go, where they wouldn't normally go, and just listen to how, go to a hospital, sit in a waiting room, ride a bus to, an uncomfortable part of town, sneak into a ladies' room if you're a guy, just go to places and listen to people, write down what people say. It is a great exercise to do, and I think it's, I think it's stunning because I have seen didn't do this all the time, but I would occasionally, as a warm-up exercise, each week have students bring in a page of dialogue that they overheard.
Yeah, I remember.
And I have seen in certain screenplays almost verbatim that dialogue appearing, in characters' voices in the scripts that they wrote. It's a great asset, and it's a really terrific training thing, to train your ears to listen, to just listen, to find rhythms. There was somebody told me a story about a rehearsal of a play by a great British playwright whose name, of course, will now elude me. But an actor could not memorize one particular line and went to the writer and said, sort of complaining about it. And the actor had inadvertently inverted two words with each other, and it changed the entire rhythm. And when he then re-looked at the text and the writer said, "No, this is the line," it all found its way into his memory perfectly. So I think that rhythm is a very, very important, as it is in music, it is a gigantically important thing in dialogue, and not just in one character's speech, but in how a scene of dialogue works back and forth with each other. The rhythm of it, the musical rhythm of it, is something that again is something that I think if you just listen, it starts to become part of your groundwater.
And correct me if you think I'm wrong. It's almost impossible to teach someone that rhythm. All you can do is express your point of view on it, and hopefully they can figure it out.
I think that is true in many different artistic pursuits.
Sure.
Can you teach the feeling that comes by putting this color next to that color if you're an artist? You have to develop your own palette as a painter, and you have to develop your own voice, as a writer. And there are many tools through that. But I think for writing dialogue, I think that making yourself listen to voices that are different from your own, because it's easy to write how you think, but you don't want to make every character sound the way you sound.
Right.
You would never say "gee-haw," but that might be the thing that that somebody on a stagecoach has to say.
No, I usually don't say "yee-haw." I tend to avoid it. So we're talking about teaching. I'm also interested because of your experiences, your long experiences as an educator. I do want to talk about the process of teaching at the same time. What would you say? So, do your pitch for why going to school is a good thing for a screenwriter. When I talked about writing groups, I think that was similar.
Those disciplines are, I think, very important. Do you have to go to school to become a successful writer? Obviously, you don't.
Right.
Of course not. Can that experience be helpful? I think there's absolutely no doubt that it can be, and that it has been. Among the things that I think it gives you, number one, it gives you, well, first of all, getting into a school like UCLA is great for the ego, because how hard it is to get in, and when any time that the word yes is said to a writer, it happens so rarely. It is a gigantic, great boost for for a writer. So that's minimal, but yes. The thing that it does is it puts you into a community of like-minded and like-feeling people, and I think that one of the great things about UCLA specifically is that it puts you into a group of people whose backgrounds are so disparate, and that is something that that is a choice that we as a faculty had made, that we did not want to have a pigeonholed UCLA writer. There was once an outside evaluation that was going on to our program, and one of the things they wanted to talk about was diversity, and that's a hot button word. And they asked me, what do what about diversity in UCLA program? And I said, we have no diversity in our program. Everyone is brilliant. But one of the selfishly inspirational things for us as instructors is being privy to the gigantically different disparate backgrounds of people that we bring in. People from different countries, people even just from different cultural backgrounds, and the way that contributes to the mechanism, to the molecule of the 8 writers in a room is both unpredictable and exciting.
And that chemistry is really important, how that makeup is.
It is gigantically important and unpredictable. You never know. I mean, some classes have been absolutely electric, and sometimes
not so much.
Not that much.
Yeah.
You never know.
Do you
try to do your best to encourage that, but you never know.
For
the most part,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying for the most part, those interactions have been, very dynamic. But that, just again speaking to the first question about what makes, what somebody can learn from being in a film school, I think that is one. You're in a community of writers. You're in a community of people whose backgrounds and everything are so different than yours that it is inspirational and enlightening. Even as far as in our classes, bringing having directors as part of it. Again, you hear a different perspective, and perspective is so important to a writer because, sitting alone in a room, we are just surrounded by our own thoughts without any feedback from any other force. So being in a classroom, you have that. You are playing to a crowd, but you're also getting all that really, you're getting, feedback. You're getting a response,
mm-hmm.
and getting a response early on is so important. It's not like you have to necessarily listen to or respond to or change. I always tell at the beginning of a class, I want feedback to be honest. I want it to be fair, honest, and not trying to step on anybody's throat. But as far as the writer, the responsibility of the writer, you don't have the responsibility to adhere to anybody's suggestions, including my own, unless I pay you Writers Guild minimum. But what you do get to do is you get to hear a first honest response. And even if at the very moment you're resistant to it, if a week later, 2 weeks later, a year later, it might start to sink in. So you have exposure to an interested audience. You have that feedback, and you have deadlines. The other thing about film school is, you have professors that care really, about your own work. My experience when I was at Queens College and becoming a playwright is that the faculty there were very disinterested and very quite jealous really, and did not really care very much about their students' success. But our faculty always has, and I think that is gigantically important. And the other thing, of course, especially with UCLA, which is my own experience really, is that is the connection to the industry. UCLA has such a reputation that the people who come through that particular program have a little bit of a a step up as far as access to the industry. So I think there are those many, and being forced to write, for God's sakes, that's ultimately the most important
big.
thing. You have to keep turning out the product.
Yeah, that's big.
One of our students, I don't know if he was in your group or not, but Dave Johnson.
Before my time.
Before you, okay. We turned him down, I think 3 times before he was finally accepted, and he's subsequently come and taught some classes at UCLA,
mm-hmm.
and is doing nicely in the industry. But what he says is that during those years when he was rejected, what he did was he kept writing, and he said he wrote 12 what he calls practice scripts.
Uh-huh.
So he took the rejection in the absolute best possible way. He refused to be defeated by it. That he kept doing the thing that he knew that he had to do, which was being an apprentice in the craft, which there is no master, to quote I think Norman Mailer, but just And I think that's another thing that film school for writers does. It makes you write, get out, get those garbage scripts out so that you can get down to, what you really want to have to say.
And every once in a while, one of those garbage scripts actually goes out and winds up in production.
Well, that is also true.
Over the years, would you say that your technique or your method or your approach to teaching changed from when you started to when you where you are today?
At the very, very beginning, I had, Richard, our dear friend and
Richard Walter,
colleague,
who's been on the show.
Yes. Richard and I had become friends in a sort of fluke, strange, odd way. We met at a friend's party, and I saw this girl across the proverbial crowded room who I hadn't seen in years and years, and she was the younger sister of a friend of mine. I hadn't seen her in 15 years, and I was like, Pat, is that you? How is that you? Anyway, she was married to Richard.
Wow.
And so we I know. So we became friends that way and pals, and we discovered that we really loved each other and had similar backgrounds and enjoyed each other. Anyway, at one point, after he'd been teaching there a couple of years, he invited me to come in and teach a class, and I had never studied screenwriting, and whatever I knew about it, it was just stuff I had taught myself, and so I had no idea if there was anything that I could say that would be of any interest to anybody. And I came in with some trepidation, but I believed what I believed, and I think any teacher teaches in the way that they have learned, and I think that's a valuable thing for a teacher, to keep on learning and to keep on recognizing what they're doing is just what they do, and whatever tools you use. I mean, I used to defrost the refrigerator with a pot of hot water and a hammer and a chisel. Those are my tools. So trying to teach, I did not have a lot of confidence in it at the beginning, but I had what I believed to be sound principles. I think that over the years I became more confident, and I think that has helped. The more you feel that you've made connections with the students, and that, as a teacher, having been a student and as a teacher, you can feel when you are reaching somebody in a way that is valuable. You can feel, just like between, a play and its audience when there are electricity bills. I think that, in the classroom, you can feel a connection. You can feel trust. You can feel that something you are doing is reaching into the nucleus of a place, that you are finding. You're being able to see what the writer is wanting that story to be. You are able to see where it isn't quite that yet, and you'll be able to find. And I think the more you teach, the more you are able to see and communicate pathways from where they are to where you feel that it is that they want to bring it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that the clarity of that vision over the years has increased, and my ability to be able to communicate it and to be able to recognize the skills that a student has at the moment, to be able to realize that they can make in this moment, that they're capable of taking this many steps, but not quite this many steps yet, and to be able to lead them to make those steps and to recognize that the others will come.
So I've been at it now 6 years. As I'm going into my 7th year doing it, and I think I'm just now starting to get to where you're talking about, where I can, I've felt all along that it has increased for me my ability to analyze what's going on in the classroom and what people's needs are and so on. And so I think what you're saying is extremely valuable and accurate. I am curious, what are your biggest, 2, 3, 4 screenwriting pet peeves that you see over and over again, and you say, why does this keep coming in this way?
Thinking that there's a story when there isn't, I think is the I think is the biggest. Having a sense of what the story is aboutness in other words, it's sort of theme without it really without there having recognized how many steps there are to actually, how many events have to actually occur. I'd say those are a couple of them. I guess being derivative and not having a sense of originality. I guess those are the pet peeves. I mean, those are the things that I think most stand in a writer's way. I guess in a writer, forcing a story to become the thing that they thematically want it to be, rather than finding the organic truth in the story itself, and being afraid to let go of the thing that they think is their lifeline to it.
That's very interesting stuff. I mean, those are rather broad, so I imagine you've seen a lot of different versions of that over time. And so
yes.
I think that's very valuable for writers to hear. Hey, of course, when you're first starting out as a writer, pretty much almost everybody is imitating something. There aren't too many true prodigies.
That's yes, and yes, that of course is true. I think it takes courage and confidence in your own ability to be able to disengage and take apart the thing that you think is absolutely necessary and valuable. Mm-hmm. I think that's why theme. Let me back up here. When people go to school, high school, college, and study whether it's whatever, any kind of literature, whatever it might be, and for the most part, people who teach literature have never written literature. Most of them have studied it, and there's great value in getting their degrees and having studied it.
Right.
But the thing that makes a practitioner's experience as a teacher different from someone who has not been a practitioner, to me, is extremely important. And the difference is that if you have not been a practitioner, your only view of any product has been as a finished work. All of the questions have now been answered, whether they've been answered in the best possible way or any way, they are now done. And so you look back at something that is finished. But when your life has been as a practitioner, you are looking from a very different vantage point. What you're looking at is every single question yet being unanswered, some of them even being unasked. You are standing at one side of a chasm, and believing that you can safely get to the other side, even though there's yet no bridge to get you across.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And you have to, in a kind of way, build that trestle as you are walking over it, with nothing underneath it to support it except your temerity that you'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that is the reason I think that theme is so important. Because when a non-writer, when just a student of literature looks at something, they can look back and say, "Oh, the theme of this is what the writer meant to convey." And if we start off with theme, it can successfully throw that bridge across that chasm and take root on the other side, and it gives us something solid to walk across. That gives a certain kind of confidence. Looking at Laos Egre, adultery leads to murder. That's one of his 5 or 7 sort of themes that go into all plays.
Right.
So you start with that theme, and you start with adultery, and it's going to lead to murder. Okay. Well, now, my God, isn't that great? I now know all these scenes that I can now write, showing how proving how adultery will lead to murder in this story. The problem with that is that while it provides for you, the writer, a safe way across, it also gives the reader or the listener or the viewer, a view to the end of that story way before the end should be visible to them.
Sure.
Because that's the way you got there. When you write from desire, and you have somebody who is fiercely desirous of somebody, well, we don't know what's going to happen. My God, anything can happen. But anything can happen is a does not inspire confidence when you're trying to write it, because you just don't know what works, what doesn't work, and you might, you are in danger of falling down that deep gorge. So trying to instill the confidence in a writer that who the character is and what it is they want and what the circumstances that are true to them and their true to psychology, that itself will spin a web that will be strong enough to support the story across that gorge. That to me is what I try to do as a teacher, is that I try to find the truth in the nuts and bolts of the real psychological and circumstantial world in which a character resides, what it is that they want, what it is they're willing to risk, to try to create a real world around who that character is, and give them the confidence to know that by doing that, the story that they want to tell will reveal itself, will construct itself, will be there. And sometimes that's a hard thing. It's hard sometimes to give up that sense of security for what will become instead, a sense of instability, but the surprise and the delight that a writer will feel in discovering those things as he or she goes along will translate itself to the surprise and delight that an audience will feel, rather than a sense of proving something and the slight satisfaction that you have proven. It's like writing when you learn how to write an expository essay in school. You start with a topic sentence and you write all the things that back up that topic sentence, and in the end you say, "And so we have seen." Well, that's fine for an expository essay when the goal is to prove something. Mm-hmm. But and the earliest stories we heard, Aesop's fables, they have to prove a moral. But we're not writing to prove a moral. We are writing to surprise and delight an audience, and that comes, I think, from not knowing an outcome, from just jumping into the unknown, and that's hard. That's hard to do, and it takes courage.
Apparently, I'm still learning from the master. This is really, really wonderful. Okay, so I'm curious. You clearly have been around a lot of different people in the business of show, and people trying to get into the business of show. Do you have, some story that you might think of that's quirky or weird or offbeat or strange or something that would be funny that we can enjoy?
Well, when I wrote the very first script that I wrote, it was called Holmeyer's Bridge, and I wrote it first as a short story. Then I came to California and wrote it as a screenplay. And after a bunch of drafts, really not knowing what the hell I was doing, it finally became something that became viable. And in its long checkered past, I'll tell you that it was continuously optioned for 20 consecutive years by a lot of very well-known directors and producers. Some have Academy Award winners, but never made. And during that time, while they optioned it, they very often hired me to write something of theirs. So it was both earning option money and and earning a living for me.
Sure.
But one of the most just among the times that it was owned, there was a producer whose name was Harold Hecht. He's no longer alive. But during the 50s, he had won a couple of Academy Awards, one for some pretty good films. One was called Marty, one was called Fort Apache. And he was partners with Burt Lancaster and Hill, and they were very viable and famous producing team. But I met him about 20 years later. He was now, had not really been viable in the business for a while, but was still feisty. And he was partners with a guy named Pincus. And Pincus was not a showbiz guy, but I think was in the garment business. But for some reason, they both had a joint ownership of a particular novel. It was called Slave Stealer, and they hired me to adapt the book, and at the same time optioned. There were like the 10th or 11th people, or heck, anyway, to option Holmeyer's Bridge. So I discovered when I got the job that I was about the 19th writer that had been hired to try to adapt this book. And the problem was both of the people, both Hecht and Pincus, had to agree on the final draft, of it for it to move forward. And Hecht had supervised the first 19 of them, and I was now going to write the Pincus draft. Yeah. So, and they were both at the time, they were probably both in their, late 60s, perhaps. And as I said, Pincus had never really done anything in the movies, and had made his money in the garment business. Well, he was like somebody that was very meticulous, and they had an office at Paramount. He wanted me to come in every day, and show him pages. Every day. And he would go over, the 4 or 5 pages, punctuation, and it was maddening. It was just maddening. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, at one point, I was so crazy, I opened the window of his office and jumped out the window. Fortunately, it was a ground floor office. But when I came back in, he had this, I don't know what kind of look. He didn't know what the hell, he didn't have a sense of humor. In any event, I finally talked to my agent and said, look, I can't do it this way. And they finally prevailed upon him to allow me to, write the thing and show him a draft. It was an interesting enough story. It was about a Jewish peddler around the Civil War who, from Cincinnati, who went down to the South and brought a black slave back for the Underground Railroad. But on the way, they had an affair. So it was a white man, black woman, and he was married. So it was an interesting enough story. In any event, he ultimately loved the script, and predictably, Hecht hated it. So I was then fired from the job. About a week later, I get rehired by Hecht himself to write draft number 21, and we're going over the most recent version of it, mine. And I'm saying, who wrote this shit? So I do the draft for Hecht, and not surprisingly, Pincus didn't like it, and the thing got dropped, and it was never made. So that was just that was an adventure. About 15 years later, I get a phone call at my office, and it's Hal Ackerman, a writer. And, it's usually it's Hal Ackerman, the idiot. So, I said, yes, it is Hal Ackerman, right. And it turned out it was Pincus's daughter calling me, who I had met when she was, I guess, a teenage art student when I had just met her briefly when I met him the first time. And she tells me that her dad has passed away. And I'm sorry to hear that. And she said, looking through all of his old stuff, they had found all these drafts of this slave stealer script. And she said that among all of them, the one that she liked best was the one I had written. I said, oh, that's really nice thing to say. And I told her a little bit of, a slightly redacted story, that I had written it, under his aegis, and she was very, very happy to hear that. She said that she was now partners with Harold Hecht's son.
Did they get married?
And, they were not married, but they were partners on this project, and they wanted to revive it, and were calling me to ask if I would want to, to go ahead with it, to be hired as the writer's do it. I said, well, yes, of course. The story had, unfortunately ends with a whimper, not a bang. But unfortunately, the studio who owned the rights to the book refused, for whatever reason, to give it to them. So the story.
So that's an overnight success that never.
Ignominious death, but
it's an overnight success that never happened.
Yes, exactly. The script of Holmeyer's Bridge, as I said, it was optioned by Norman Lear, by Hecht, by Robert Radnitz, who just won an Academy Award, and never made. And then it was going to be part of a book of the 10, best unknown, unproduced Hollywood scripts, and the book never came out. But the beauty of it all, the ironic beauty that I have to laugh at, is that every person who was ever involved, whoever owned it or had any interest in it, all either were at the time or subsequently became rich and famous in the industry, with the exception of its author. So there you go.
Well, I've been had the great privilege here to speak with Hal Ackerman for the last, we've been going for almost an hour and 10 minutes, and I'm wondering, Hal, as we're wrapping up the show, if you might have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you could lend to the listeners, especially those trying to make their way or find success within the industry.
Yes, I do. You were kind enough to mention my book in the beginning. A new edition, the 15th year's anniversary edition of it is coming out at the end of September.
Nice.
It is still called Write Screenplays That Sell the Ackerman Way. It is called that because it is the most pretentious title that the publishers could think of. I wanted to call it Taking Vienna because when Napoleon was asked what his theory of war was, he said, if you wish to take Vienna, take Vienna. And I still think that is great advice for a writer.
Yep, sure.
I think I've not loved every single thing that I've ever written, far from it, but I think that this book is very valuable. I really think it has some value to it.
I agree.
So I encourage people to learn through it. But the most important thing that I could say to anybody, quite truly, is that if you want to write, the only thing that you need to do is to do it. I urge every new writer to make a writing schedule for themselves, just like if you're working at McDonald's, when you have to punch in, and stick to that schedule. The sad truth is that whatever you don't write will never be mourned. No one will ever know what it was that you might have written. You have to take the possibility that you suck and say, okay, maybe I do, but here's what I can do. If it means enough to you, there is no shortcut around just doing it. Malcolm Gladwell talks about taking the 10,000 hours to become good at something. Maybe it takes that long. Maybe you'll be lucky, and in the first hour and a half, you'll produce something wonderful. But you will never, ever know the answer to that question unless you put yourself out on the line. So I'd say, just do it. Just do what makes you happy. That is the best thing I can tell people.
I couldn't think of anything better to wrap the show up with. That is very valuable advice. It is I know that's what school is all about. I know that's what the writing groups are all about, and that's sort of gives us a completion on this, that just go write, because writers write. That's the only answer there is. So that's great. Hal, this is...
I would like to just say one thing before you sign off.
Sure.
And that is how proud I am of what you have done with your life. And
thank you.
I'm sorry, but I have to say that. You are among the most talented people that I've had the pleasure to work with as a writer.
Thank you.
Your humility and generosity and talent are exceptional, and you probably take it all for granted and think it's just you being you. But having worked with all the many, many writers I have done so, I find all those qualities that you have quite exceptional. I'm very proud to have met you.
If you were sitting in the studio, you would see a very red face. Thank you for saying that. That's more than kind of you. I greatly appreciate it. And this has been a real treat, Hal. This has been so much great information, and I know that listeners are going to get a huge boost out of this particular episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. And you can pass on, if anyone of your viewers or listeners asks, if anyone wants to contact me, you have my contact info, and I'm happy to speak to anybody who cares to speak to me.
Sure, we'll put it up on the website.
Excellent.
All right. So
thank you for this opportunity, Steve. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and it was my pleasure, my delight, my honor. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Today's StoryBeat tip. Here are the rules for writing screen stories. Rule number 1. There ain't any rules. Screenwriting's an art form, and art has no rules. But there are numerous guideposts, or stepping stones, or markers that you would be wise to meet in nearly every screenplay that you write. This includes creating well-developed characters that move through well-established plot points in a well-integrated story structure. These guideposts will not be found in some top-secret book locked away in a deep underground Hollywood vault. They come from studying patterns of successful storytelling over a very long period of time, and by observing the way thousands of plays, movies, TV shows, and other bits of entertainment play out. In short, this knowledge comes from pattern recognition. Should you choose to ignore these long-established storytelling stepping stones, then you do so at your own peril. Let's be clear. I am not talking about a formula, but a known form that has been around since Hollywood began making movies. In fact, these well-known storytelling milestones have been around since Aristotle's day, something like 2,700 years ago. Rule number 2. There's an exception to everything. As already stated, screenwriting is an art, and it's also a craft. It's not a science. You are most definitely not required to follow the well-understood storytelling patterns discussed in this tip. Just don't be surprised if your off-the-beaten-path opus receives more puzzled looks than offers to buy. Rule number 3. Should you find or create an example that disagrees with or violates the long-established, well-known guideposts mentioned in rule number 1, see rule number 2. Rule number 4. When in doubt, entertain the audience. Making your work engaging, lively, inspiring, and plain old entertaining will go a long way toward your success. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.